The Story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle, the 1903 compilation. Now, upon a certain day, King Arthur proclaimed a high feast, which was held at Caerleon upon Usk. Many guests were bidden, and an exceedingly splendid court gathered at the king's castle. For all that feast there sat 7 kings and 5 queens of royal estate, and there were high lords and beautiful ladies of degree, to the number of 67. And there were a multitude of those famous knights of the king's court, who are reckoned the most renowned in arms in all of Christendom. And of all these great gatherings of kings, lords, and knights, not one man looked askance at his neighbor, but all were united in good fellowship. Wherefore, when the young king looked about him and beheld such peace and amenity among these noble lords, wherefore, aforetime had been discord and ill regard, "Certes," quoth he to himself, "it is wonderful how this raid of mine hath knit men together in kindness and good fellowship." And because of such thoughts as these, his spirit took wing like unto a bird, and sang within him. Now, while the king sat thus at feast, lo, there came a herald messenger of the west country. And the herald came and stood before the king, and said, "Greetings to thee, King Arthur." And the king said, "Speak, and tell me, what is thy message?" To which the herald made reply, "I come from King Leo de Grance of Camelard, who is in sore trouble. For thus it is, his enemy and thine enemy, King Rience of North Wales, doth make sundry demands of my master, which demands that he altogether loath to fulfill. And King Rience of North Wales threatened to bring war unto Camelard, because my lord doth not immediately fulfill those demands. Now, King Leo de Grance hath no such array of knights and armed men as he one time had gathered about him for to defend his kingdom against assault. For since thou in thy majesty hath brought peace unto this realm, and hath reduced the power of all those kings under thee, those knights who once made the court of King Leo de Grance so famous have gone elsewhither, for to seek better opportunities for their great valor and prowess at arms than his peaceful court can afford. Wherefore, my master King Leo de Grance doth beseech aid of thee, who art his king and overlord." To these things that the herald messenger said, King Arthur, and all that court that feasted with him, listened in entire silence. And the king's countenance, which erstwhile had been expanded with cheerfulness, became overcast and dark with anger. "Ha!" he cried, "this is verily no good news that thou hast brought hither to our feast. Now I will give aid I am able to thy master, King Leo de Grance, in this extremity, that right speedily. But tell me, Sir Herald, what things are they that King Rience demandeth of thy master?" "That I will tell you, lord," quoth the herald messenger. "Firstly, King Rience maketh demand upon my master a great part of those lands of Camelard that march upon the borders of northern Wales. Secondly, he maketh demand that Lady Guinevere, the king's daughter, be delivered in marriage unto Duke Mordaunt of North Umber, who is of kin of King Rience, and that duke, though a mighty warrior, is so evil of appearance and so violent of temper that I believe there is not his like for ugliness or madness of humor in all of the world." Now, when King Arthur heard this that the messenger said, he was immediately seized with an extraordinary passion of anger, for his eyes appeared, in as it were, to shoot forth sparks of pure light. His face flamed like fire, and he ground his teeth together like the stones of a quern. Then he immediately rose from the chair where he sat, and went forth from that place. And all those who beheld his anger shuddered thereat, and turned their eyes away from his countenance. Then King Arthur went into an inner room of the castle by himself, and there he walked up and down for a great while. And in that time, no one of his household dared to come nigh to him. And the reason of the king's wrath was this, that ever since he had lain wounded and sick, nigh unto death in the forest, he bare in mind how the Lady Guinevere had suddenly appeared before him like some tall, straight, shining angel, who had descended unto him out of paradise, all full of pity and exceedingly beautiful. Wherefore, at thought of that wicked mad Duke Mordaunt of North Umber making demand unto marriage with her, he was seized with a rage so violent that it shook his spirit like a mighty wind. So for a long while he walked up and down in his wrath, as aforesaid, and no one durst come nigh unto him, but all stood afar off, watching him from a distance. Then after a while he gave command that Merlin and Sir Ulfius and Sir Kay should come to him at that place where he was. And when they had come thither, he talked to them for a considerable time, bidding Merlin for to make ready to go upon a journey with him, and bidding Sir Ulfius and Sir Kay for to gather together a large army of chosen knights and armed men, and to bring that army straightway into those parts coadjacent to the royal castle at Tintagallon, which same standeth close to the borders of northern Wales and Camelard. So Sir Ulfius and Sir Kay went about to do as King Arthur commanded, and Merlin also went about to do as he commanded. And the next, King Arthur and Merlin together with certain famous knights of the king's court, who were most approved at arms of all those about him, to wit, Sir Gawain and Sir Ewain, who were nephews unto the king, and Sir Pellias and Sir Geraint, the son of Sir Erbrin, set forth for Tintagallon across the forest land of Usk. So they travelled for all that day, and part of the next, and without adventure or misadventure of any sort. So they came at last to that large and noble castle, hight Tintagallon, which guards the country bordering upon Cameliard in northern Wales. Here King Arthur was received with great rejoicing, for whithersoever the king went, the people loved him very dearly. Wherefore the folk of Tintagallon were very glad when he came unto them. Now the morning after King Arthur had come unto Tintagallon, he and Merlin were glad to arise betimes to go abroad for to enjoy the dewy freshness of the early daytime. So in the cool of the day they walked together in the garden and beneath the shadow of a tall straight tower. And all about them were many trees with a good shade, where the little birds sang sweetly in the cheerfulness of the summer weather. And here King Arthur opened his mind very freely to Merlin, and he said him, Merlin, I do believe that the Lady Guinevere is the fairest lady in all the world, wherefore my heart seemeth to be entirely filled with love for her, and that to such a degree that I think her continually by day, and I likewise dream of her many times at night. And this has been the case with me, Merlin, ever since a month ago when I lay sick in that hermit's cell in the forest, what time she came and stood beside me like a shining angel out of paradise. So I am not willing that any other man than I should have her for his wife. Now I know very well that thou art wonderfully cunning in those arts of magic that may change a man in his appearance, so that even those who know him best may not recognize him. Wherefore I very greatly desire it of thee that thou wilt disguise me, so that I may go, unknown of any man, into Cameliard, and that I may dwell there in such a way that I may see Lady Guinevere every day. For I tell thee very truly that I greatly desire to behold her in such a wise that she may not be in any way witting of my regard. Likewise, I would fain see for myself how great may be the perils that encompass King Leodegrance. My lord king, said Merlin, it shall be as thou desirest, and this morning I will cause thee to be so disguised that no one in all the world shall be able to know thee who thou art. So that morning, a little before the prime, Merlin came unto the king where he was, and gave him a little cap. And the cap was of such a sort that when the king set it upon his head he assumed, upon the instant, the appearance of a rude and rustic fellow from the countryside. Then the king commanded that a jerkin of rough frieze should be brought to him, and with this he covered his royal and knightly vestments, and with it he hid that golden collar with its jewel and pendant, which he continually wore about his neck. Then, setting the cap upon his head, he assumed at once the guise of that peasant hind. Whereupon, being thus entirely disguised, he quitted Tintagallon, unknown of any man, and took his way afoot upon the town of Cameliard. Now toward the slanting of the day he drew nigh to that place, and lo, he beheld before him a large and considerable town of many comely houses, with red walls and shining windows. And the houses of the town sat upon a high steep hill, with one overlooking the other, and the town itself was encompassed around it by a great wall, high and strong. And a great castle guarded the town, and the castle had very many high towers and roofs. And all about that tower were many fair gardens and lawns and meadows, and several orchards and groves of trees with thick and pleasant shade. Now at that time of the day, the sky behind the tower was all, as it were, an entire flame of fire, so that the towers and the battlements of the castle and the roofs and chimneys thereof stood altogether black against the brightness of the light. And behold, great flocks of pigeons encircled the towers of the castle in a continual flight against the fiery sky. So because King Arthur was aweary from walking all that day, it appeared to him that he had hardly ever beheld in all his life so fair and pleasing a place as that excellent castle with its gardens and lawns and groves of trees. Thus came King Arthur unto the castle of Cameliard in the guise of a poor peasant from the countryside, and no man in all the world knew him for who he was. So, having reached the castle, he made inquiries for the head gardener thereof, and when he had speech with the gardener, he besought him that he might be taken into service in that part of the garden that appertained to the dwelling place of the Lady Guinevere. Then the gardener looked upon him, and saw that he was tall and strong and well framed, wherefore he liked him very well, and took him into service, even as he desired. And this it was that King Arthur of Britain became a gardener's boy at Cameliard. Now the king was very glad to be in that garden, for in this pleasant summer season, the Lady Guinevere came every day to walk with her damsels among the flowers. And King Arthur, all disguised as a peasant gardener boy, beheld her a very many times when she came thither. So King Arthur abode at that place for above a week, and he took no care in all that time, and he enjoyed none of his kingly estate, but was only a gardener's boy in the castle garden of Cameliard. Now it happened upon a day when the weather was very warm, and one of the damsels who was in attendance upon the Lady Guinevere arose in the early morning whiles while the air was still cool and refreshing. So leaving the Lady Guinevere still sleeping, this damsel, whose name was Melcene of the White Hand, went into the anteroom, and opening the casement thereof, looked forth into the garden of roses which adjoined the Lady Guinevere's bower. Now there was at that place a carven marble figure of a youth holding his arms in marble ewer, and a fountain of water as clear as crystal flowed out from the ewer into a basin of marble. And the figure and the fountain and the marble basin into which the fountain flowed lay beneath the shadow of a linden tree, and all about was a thick growth of roses that the place was entirely hidden, saving only those windows of the castle that were above. So it befell that as this damsel looked down thitherward out of the window, she beheld a very wonderful sight. For lo, a strange knight kneeled beside the fountain, and bathed his face and his bosom in the crystal water thereof. And the damsel saw that sunlight fell down through the leaves of the linden tree and lay upon that strange knight. And she perceived that his hair and his beard were of the color of red gold, shining surpassing in the brightness of the morning. And she beheld that his brow and his throat and his bosom were white like alabaster. And she beheld that around his neck and shoulders there hung a golden collar of marvelous beauty, so that when the sunlight shone upon it, it flashed like pure lightning. So, beholding this strange appearance, as it were a vision, the damsel Melusine stood for a long while, all entranced with wonder and with pleasure, and wist not whether that which she saw was a dream or no dream, nor whether he who sat there was a spirit or whether he was a man of flesh and blood. Then by and by, recovering somewhat from her astonishment, she withdrew herself softly from the casement, and turning about, ran fleetly down the turret stairs, and so came out thence into that fair and blooming garden at the foot of the tower. So she ran through the garden with all speed and silence, and thus came down an alleyway unto the marble fountain and the linden tree and the rose trees about, where she had anon beheld that strange knight bathing himself in the crystal waters. But King Arthur had heard the coming of that damsel, and had speedily set the cap upon his head again, so that when the damsel Melusine came thither, she found no one by the fountain but the gardener's boy. And from him she demanded, "Who art thou, fellow, and why sittest thou here by the fountain?" And to her he replied, "I am the gardener's lad who came a short time ago to take service at this place." "Then tell me, fellow," quoth she, "and tell me truly, who was that young knight who is here beside the fountain but now, and whither hath he gone?" "Lady, whereunto," he said, "there has been no one at this fountain this day, but only I." "Nay, fellow," she cried, "thou art deceiving me, for I do assure thee that with mine own eyes I beheld but now, where a strange young knight sat bathing himself in the waters of this fountain." And the gardener's boy said, "Lady, that which I have told you is the very truth, for indeed there hath no one been here in this morning but I. Wherefore, and thou deemest thou hast seen anyone else, thou art certainly mistaken." At this the damsel set her look upon him in great perplexity. Likewise she marveled very greatly, for she could not altogether disbelieve him, nor yet could she entirely believe him either, because her eyes had beheld that which she had beheld, and she wotted that she had not been mistaken. Therefore she knew not what to think, and because of her perplexity, she felt a very great displeasure at the gardener's boy. "Truly, wherefore," she said, "if thou art deceiving me, I shall certainly cause thee to suffer a great deal of pain, for I shall have thee whipped with cords." And thereupon she turned and went away from that place, much marveling at that strange thing, and wondering what it all signified. That morning she told unto the Lady Guinevere all that she had seen, but the Lady Guinevere only laughed at her and mocked her, telling her that she had been asleep and dreaming when she had beheld that vision. And indeed the damsel herself had begun to think that this must have been the case. Nevertheless, she thereafter looked out every morning from her casement window, albeit she beheld nothing for a great while, for King Arthur came not soon to that place again. So by and by there befell another certain morning when she looked out for that casement, and lo, there sat that strange knight at the fountain once more as she had aforetime sat, and he bathed his face and bosom in the water as he had aforetime done, and he appeared as comely and as noble as he had appeared before, and his hair and his young beard shone like gold as they had shone before in the sun. And this time she beheld that his collar of gold lay upon the brink of the fountain beside him, and it sparkled with great splendor in the sunlight all the whiles he bathed his bosom. Then after that damsel had regarded him for a considerable time, she ran with all speed to the chamber where the Lady Guinevere still lay, and she cried with a loud voice, "Lady, lady, arouse thee and come with me, for lo, that same young knight whom I beheld before is even now bathing himself at the fountain under the linden tree." Then the Lady Guinevere, greatly marveling, aroused herself right quickly, and delighted herself with all speed went with the damsel into the casement window, which looked out to that part of the garden. And there she herself beheld the young knight where he lathed himself at the fountain. And she saw that his hair and his beard shone like gold in the sunlight, and she saw that his undervestment was of purple linen threaded with gold, and she saw that beside him lay that cunningly wrought collar of gold inset with many jewels of various colors, and the collar shone with great splendor where it lay upon the marble verge of the fountain. Somewhile she gazed, exceedingly astonished, and then she commanded the damsel Melusine for to come with her, and therewith she turned and descended to the turret stairs, and went quickly out into the garden as her damsel had done aforetime. Then, as that damsel had done, she straightway hastened with all speed down the alleyway toward the fountain. But behold, when she had come there, she found no young knight, but only the gardener boy, exactly as had happened with the damsel Melusine aforetime. For King Arthur had heard her coming, and he immediately put that enchanted cap upon his head. Then the Lady Guinevere marveled very greatly to find there only the gardener's boy, and she wist not what to think of so strange a thing. Wherefore she demanded of him, even as Melusine had done, whither had gone the young knight whom she had beheld anon there at the fountain. And unto her the gardener lad made answer as aforetime, Lady, there beth no one at this place at any time this morning, but only I. Now when King Arthur had donned his cap at the coming of the lady, he had, in his great haste, forgotten his golden collar, and this Guinevere beheld where it lay shining very brightly beside the margin of the fountain. How now, quoth she, wouldst thou dare to make a mock of me? Now tell me, thou fellow, do gardener boys in this land whence thou didst come wear golden collars about their necks like unto that collar that lieth yonder beside that fountain? Now, and I had thee well whipped, it would be thy rightful due. But take thou that bauble yonder, and give it unto him who it doth rightfully belong, and tell him from me that it doth become a true belted knight for to hide himself away in the privy gardens of a lady. Then turned she with damsel Melusine, she left that place, and went back again into her bower. Yet indeed, for all that day, she sat over her broidery. She did never cease to marvel and wonder how it was possible that strange young knight should so suddenly have vanished away and left only the poor gardener's boy in his stead. Nor, for a long time, might she unriddle that strange thing. Then of a sudden, at that time when the heat of the day was sloping towards the cooler part of the afternoon, she aroused herself because of a thought that had come to an instant upon her. So she called the damsel Melusine to come to her, and she bade her to go and tell the gardener's boy for to fetch her straightway a basket of fresh roses for to adorn her tower chamber. So Melusine went and did as she bade, and after considerable time the gardener's lad came bearing a great basket of roses. And lo, he wore his cap upon his head, and all the damsels in waiting upon the Lady Guinevere, when they saw how he had worn his cap in her presence, cried out upon him, and Melusine of the White Hand demanded of him, What? How now, Sir Boar? Dost thou know so little of what is due unto a king's daughter, that thou dost wear thy cap even in the presence of the Lady Guinevere? Now I bid thee straightway to take off the cap off thy head. And to her King Arthur made reply, Lady, I cannot take off my cap. Quoth the Lady Guinevere, And why canst thou not take off thy cap, thou surly fellow? Lady, said he, I cannot take off my cap because I have an ugly place upon my head. Then wear thy cap, quoth the Lady Guinevere. Only fetch thou roses unto me. And so at her bidding he brought the roses to her. But when he had come nigh unto the lady, she of a sudden snatched at the cap and plucked it off his head. Then lo, he was upon the instant transformed, for instead of the gardener's boy there stood before the Lady Guinevere and her damsel the appearance of a young noble knight with hair and beard like threads of gold. Then he let fall his basket of roses that the flowers were scattered all across the floor, and he stood and looked at all who were there. And some of those damsels in attendance upon the Lady Guinevere shrieked, and others stood still for pure amazement, and wist not how to believe what their eyes beheld. But not one of those ladies knew that he whom she beheld was King Arthur. Nevertheless, the Lady Guinevere remembered that this was the knight whom she had found so sorely wounded lying in the hermit's cell in the forest. Then she laughed, and flung him back his cap again. Take thy cap, quoth she, and go thy ways, thou gardener's boy, who hath an ugly place upon his head. Thus she said, because she was minded to mock him. But King Arthur did not reply to her, but straightway, with great sobriety of aspect, set his cap upon his head again. So resuming his humble guise once more, he turned and quitted that place, leaving those roses scattered all over the floor even as they had fallen. And after that time, whenever the Lady Guinevere would come upon the gardener's lad in the garden, she would say unto her damsel in such a voice that he might hear her speech, Lo, yonder is the gardener's lad who hath an ugly place upon his head, that he must always wear his cap for to hide it. Thus she spake openly, mocking at him, but privily she bade her damsels to say naught concerning these things, but to keep unto themselves all those things which had befallen. Now upon a certain day at this time there came a messenger to the court of King Leo de Grance, with news that King Rience of North Wales and Duke Mordaunt of North Umber were coming thither, and they brought with them a very noble and considerable court of knights and lords. At this news, King Leo de Grance was much troubled in spirit, for he wist not what such a visit might betoken, and yet he greatly feared that it boded daunt come to ill for him. So on that day, when King Rience and Duke Camillard of North Umber appeared before the castle, King Leo de Grance went forth to greet them, and the three met together in the meadows that lie beneath the castle walls of Camillard. There King Leo de Grance bade those others welcome in such manner as was fitting, desiring them that they should come to the castle with him so that he might entertain them according to their degree. But to this courtesy upon the part of King Leo de Grance, King Rience deigned no pleasing reply. Nay, quoth he, we will not go with thee into thy castle, King Leo de Grance, until we learn whether thou art our friend or our enemy. For now we are, certes, no such good friends with thee that we care sit down at thy table and eat of thy salt. Nor may we aught but enemies of thine until thou hast satisfied our demands, to wit, that thou givest me those lands which I demand of thee, and that thou givest unto my cousin Duke Mordaunt of Northumber the Lady Guinevere to be his wife. In these matters thou hast it in thy power to make us either thy friends or thine enemies. Wherefore we shall abide here outside of thy castle for 5 days, in the which time thou mayest frame thine answer, and so we may know whether we shall be friends or enemies. And in the meantime, quoth Duke Mordaunt of Northumber, I do hold myself ready for to make contest my right unto the hand of Lady Guinevere with any knight of thy court, who hath a mind to deny my title thereto. And if thou hast no knight in all thy court who can successfully essay a bout of arms with me, thyself canst hardly hope to succeed in defending thyself against the great army of knights whom King Rance hath gathered together to bring against thee in this case thou deniest that which we ask. Then was King Leo de Grance exceedingly cast down in his spirits, for he feared those two proud lords, and he wist not what to say in answer to them. Wherefore he turned and walked back into his castle again, beset with great anxiety and sorrow of spirit. And King Rance and Duke Mordaunt and their court of lords and knights pitched their pavilions in those meadows over the castle, so that the plain was entirely covered with those pavilions. And when the next morning had come, Duke Mordaunt of Northumber went forth clad all in armor of proof, and he stood down in the field before the castle and gave great challenge to those within, daring any knight to come forth to meet with him in knightly encounter. Ho, he cried, and now ye knights of Cameliard, is there no one to come forth to meet me? How then may ye hope to contend with the knights of North Wales, and ye fear to meet with one single knight from Northumber? So he scoffed at them in his pride, and none dared to come forth from Cameliard against him. For the Duke of Northumber was one of the most famous knights in his day, and one of exceeding strength and success in arms. And there was now, in these times of peace, no one of King Leo de Grance's court who was at all able to face a warrior of his approved skill and valor. Wherefore no one took up that challenge which the Duke of Northumber gave to the court of Cameliard. Meantime, many people gathered upon the walls of Cameliard, and gazed down therefrom that proud and haughty Duke, all bedight in his splendid armor, and all were grieved and ashamed that there was no one in the peaceful town to go out against him. And all of the lords and knights of King Rance's court came and stood in front of the king's pavilion, and laughed and clapped their hands together, and cheered Duke Mordaunt as he so rode up and down before them. And the greater they were expanded with mirth, the more abashed were the people of Cameliard. Ho ho! Cried the proud Duke. How now? Will no one come forth to meet me? How then may ye of Cameliard hope to face the King of North Wales and all his knightly array, of which I am but one man? And the people of Cameliard gathered upon the walls, listened to him with shame and sorrow. Now all this while King Arthur digged in the garden, but nevertheless he was well aware of everything that passed, and about how the Duke of Northumber rode up and down so proudly before the castle walls. So of a sudden it came to him that he could not abide this any longer. Wherefore he laid aside his spade, and went out secretly by a postern way, and so up into the town. Now there was in Cameliard an exceedingly rich merchant by name of Ralph of Cardiff, and the renown of his possessions and high estate had reached even unto King Arthur's ears at Caerleon. Accordingly, it was unto this house that King Arthur directed his steps. And while he was in a narrow way, not far off from the merchant's house, he took off his magic cap of disguise, and assumed somewhat of his noble appearance once more, for he was now of a mind to show his knightliness unto those who looked upon him. Accordingly, when he stood before the rich merchant in his closet, and when the merchant looked up into his face, he wist not what to think to behold so noble a lord clad all in frieze. But King Arthur was a stranger to the good man, so that he knew not his countenance, yet that merchant wist that he was of no ordinary knight, but that he must assuredly be one of high degree and in authority, even though he was clad in frieze. Then King Arthur opened the breast of his jerkin, and showed the merchant the gold collar that hung around his neck. And also he showed beneath the rough coat of frieze that there was an undergarment of fine purple silk embroidered with gold. And then he showed the good man his own signet ring, and when the merchant saw it, he knew that to be the ring of the King of Britain. Wherefore, beholding these tokens of high and lordly authority, the merchant rose and stood before the king, and doffed his cap. Sir Merchant, quoth the king, know that I am a stranger knight in disguise in this place. Nevertheless, I may tell thee that I am a very good friend to King Leo de Grance, and wish him exceedingly well. Thou art assuredly aware of how the Duke of Northumber rides continually up and down before the king's castle, and challenges anyone within to come forth for to fight against him in behalf of the Lady Guinevere. Now I am a mind to essay that combat myself, and I hope a very great deal that I shall succeed in upholding the honor of Cameliard, and to bring shame upon its enemies. Sir Merchant, I know very well that thou hast several suits of noble armor in thy treasury, for the fame of them hath reached unto mine ears, though I dwell a considerable distance from this place. Wherefore, I desire that thou shalt provide me in the best manner thou art able to do so, that I might straightway essay a bout of arms with that Duke of Northumber. Moreover, I do pledge thee my knightly word that thou shalt be fully recompensed for the best suit of armor thou canst let me have." "My lord," said Master Ralph, "I perceive that thou art no ordinary errant knight, but rather someone of extraordinary estate. Wherefore it is a very great pleasure to fulfill all that thy behest. But even an thou wert other than thou art, I would be altogether willing to equip thee with armor, seeing as thou hast a mind to ride forth against yonder duke." Upon this he rang a little silver bell that stood nigh to him, and in answer to its sound several attendants immediately appeared. Into their hands he entrusted the person of the king, bidding them to do him extraordinary honor. Accordingly, certain of those attendants prepared for the king a bath of tepid water perfumed with ambergris, very grateful to the person. And after he was bathed in this bath, he was wiped with soft linen towels. Other attendants conducted him to a hall all hung with tapestries and broideries, and at this place a noble feast had been spread ready for his refreshment. Here that lordly merchant himself administered to the king's wants, serving him with various meats, very dainty, and of several sorts, and likewise with fine white bread. And he poured him wine of various countries, some as red as rubies, others as yellow as gold. And indeed the king had hardly ever enjoyed a better feast than that which the merchant Ralph of Cardiff had ever spread for him. And after he had entirely refreshed himself with eating, there came 6 pages, richly clad in saracenet of azure. And these, taking the king to an apartment of great estate, they there clad him in a suit of Spanish armor, very cunningly wrought and all inlaid with gold. And the like of that armor was hardly to be found in all of the land. The jupon and the several trappings of the armor were all of satin, and as white as milk, and the shield was white, and altogether without emblazonment of device of any sort. Then these attendants conducted the king into the courtyard, and there stood a noble war horse as white as milk, and all of the trappings of the horse were of milk-white cloth, without emblazonment or adornment of any sort, and the bridle and the bridle rein were all studded over with bosses of silver. Then after the attendants had aided King Arthur to mount his steed, the lordly merchant came forward and gave him many words of good cheer, and so the king bade him adieu, and rode away all shining in white, and glittering in fine armor, wherefore he resembled the full moon in harvest season. And as he drave down the stony steps of the town, the people turned and gazed after him, for he made a very noble appearance as he passed along the narrow way between the houses of the town. So King Arthur directed his way to the postern gate of the castle, and having reached that place, he dismounted and tied his horse. Then he straightway entered the garden, and there, finding an attendant, he made demand that he should have present speech with the Lady Guinevere. So the attendant, all amazed at his lordly appearance, went and delivered the message. And by the Lady Guinevere came, much wondering, and passed along the gallery, with several of her damsel, until she had come over to where King Arthur was. But when King Arthur looked up and saw her above him, he loved her exceedingly well, and he said to her, "Lady, I have great will to do thee honor as I am able, for I now go forth to do combat with that Duke of Northumber, who rides up and down before this castle. Moreover, I hope and verily believe that I shall encompass his downfall. Accordingly, I do beseech thee of some token, such as a lady may give unto a knight for to wear, for when the knight rides forth to do her honor." Then the Lady Guinevere said, "Certes, Sir Knight, I would that I knew who thou art. Yet though I know not, nevertheless I am altogether willing for to take thee for my champion as thou offerest. So, touching that token thou speakest of, if thou wilt tell me what it is that thing that thou desirest, I will gladly give it to thee." "And that be so, lady," said King Arthur, "I would fain have that necklace that thou wearest about thy throat, for meseemeth that if I had tied it about my arm, I would find my valor greatly increased thereby." "Pardie, Sir Knight," said the lady, "what thou desirest of me thou shalt assuredly have." Thereupon speaking, she took from her long smooth neck the necklace of pearls which she wore, and dropped the same down to King Arthur where he stood. And King Arthur took the necklace and tied it about his arm, and he gave great thanks for it. And he saluted the Lady Guinevere with very knightly grace, and she saluted him. And then straightway he went forth from that place, greatly expanded with joy that the Lady Guinevere had shown him such favour. Now the report had gone about Camelard that a knight was to go forth to fight the Duke of Northumber, wherefore great crowds gathered upon the walls, and King Leodegrance and Lady Guinevere, all of the court of the king, came to that part of the castle walls overlooking the meadow where the Duke of Northumber defended. Wherefore, so great a concourse was presently assembled that any knight might be encouraged to do his utmost before a multitude as that which looked down upon the field. Then of a sudden the portcullis of the castle was lifted, and the bridge let fall, and the white champion rode forth to that encounter which he had undertaken. And, as he drove across the narrow bridge, the hooves of his war horse smote the boards with a noise like thunder, and when he came out into the sunlight, lo, his armor flamed of a sudden like unto lightning, When the people saw him, they shouted aloud. Then when the Duke of North Umber beheld a knight all clad in white, he rode straightway to him and spoke to him with words of knightly greeting. "Messire," he said, "I perceive that thou bearest no crest upon thy helm, nor hast thou a device of any sort upon thy shield. Wherefore I know not who thou art. Nevertheless, I do believe that thou art a knight of good quality and of approved courage, or else thou wouldst not have come to this place." "Certes, Sir Knight," said King Arthur, "I am of a quality equal to thine own, and as for my courage, I do believe that it hath been approved in as many encounters as even thine own hath been." "Sir Knight," quoth the Duke of North Umber, "thou speakest with a very large spirit. Nevertheless, thou mayest of such prayer as thou art able, for I shall now presently so cast thee down from thy seat, so as thou shalt never rise again, for as I have served better men than ever thou mayest hope to be." To this King Arthur made answer with great calmness of demeanor, "Thou shalt be according to the will of heaven, Sir Knight, and not according to thy will." So each knight saluted the other and rode to his assigned station, and there each dressed his spear with his shield and made him ready for the encounter. Then a silence fell upon all so great that a man might hear his own heart beat in the stillness. So for a small space each knight sat like a statue made of iron. Then of a sudden each shouted to his war horse, and drave spurs into his flank, and launched forth from his station. And so they met in the midst of the course with a noise like unto a violent thunderclap. And lo, the spear of the Duke of North Umber burst into splinters upon the very truncheon thereof. But the spear of King Arthur broke not, but held, so that the Duke was cast out of his saddle like a windmill, whirling in the air and smiting the earth, so that the ground shuddered beneath him. And indeed he rolled a full 3 times over ere he ceased to fall. Then all of the people upon the walls shouted with might and main, so that the noise thereof was altogether astonishing, for they had hardly hoped that their champion should have proved so extraordinarily strong and skillful. Meanwhile, those of King Rience's court ran immediately to the Duke of Umber where he lay upon the earth, and they straightway unleashed his helm for to give him air. And the first they thought he was dead, and then they thought that he was like to die, for behold, he lay without life or motion, nor did he recover from that swoon wherein he lay for the space of a full 2 hours and more. Now whilst the attendants were thus busied about Duke Mordaunt of North Umber, King Arthur sat his horse, very quietly, observing all that they did. Then, perceiving that his enemy was not dead, he turned about him and rode away from that place. Nor did he return to Camelard at that time, for he deemed that he had not yet entirely done with these enemies to the peace of his realm. Wherefore, he was minded not yet to return the horse and the armor to the merchant, but to keep them for a while for another occasion. So he bethought him of how, coming to Camelard, he had passed through that arm of the forest where certain wood choppers were at work felling the trees. Wherefore, remembering that place, he thought he would betake him thither, to leave his horse and armor in the care of those rude folk until he would need those things once more. So now he rode away into the countryside, leaving behind him the town and the castle and all the noise of the shouting and rejoicing. Nor did he so much as turn his head to look back toward that place where he had so violently overthrown his enemy. And now you shall presently hear of certain pleasant adventures of a very joyous sort that befell him ere he accomplished all his purposes. For when a man is a king among men, as King Arthur, then he is of such calm and quiet temper that thither victory nor defeat may cause him to become either unduly exalted in his own opinion, or so troubled in spirit as to be altogether cast down into despair. So if you would become like to King Arthur, then you shall take all your triumphs as he took his victory, for you will not be turned aside from your final purposes by the great applause that many men may give you. But you will first finish your work that you set yourself to perform, ere you give yourself ease to sit you down and enjoy the fruits of your victory. Yea, he who is a true king of men will not say to himself, Lo, I am worthy to be crowned in laurels, but rather will he say to himself, What more is there I may do to make the world a better place because of my endeavors? Now the day was extraordinarily sweet and pleasant unto one so lusty of frame and so lithe of heart as good King Arthur. For the bright clouds swam smoothly across the blue sky in prodigious volumes of vapor, and the wind blew across the long grass of the meadowlands and across the fields of growing wheat, so that a multitude of waves traveled over the hills and valleys, like it were across an entire sea of green. And now all the earth would be darkened with the wide shadows from those clouds, and anon everything would burst out of a sudden into a wonderful radiance of sunlight once more. And the little birds they sang so gaily in the hedgerows and the leafy thickets, as though they would burst their tiny throats with singing. And the cock crowed lusty and strong from the farm croft, and all was so blithe and comely that the young king, with the visor of his helmet uplifted to the refreshment of the gentle breeze, would sometimes carol very joyously in his journeying. So travelled King Arthur in all that gay and tender summer season, when the earth was young and the time was of a long gone by. Now, you are to remember that when King Arthur had come from Caerleon unto the castle of Tintagel, he had brought with him 4 young knights for to bear him company. And those knights aforesaid were as follows. There was Sir Gawain, the son of King Lot and of Queen Margase. And there was Sir Urwain, the son of King Uraines and Queen Morgana le Fay. And these 2 were nephews and half-blood unto the king. And there was Sir Pelaius, and there was Sir Geraint, the son of Erbin. These were the 4 noble young knights that had come with King Arthur from Camelot to Tintagel. Now it befell, as King Arthur rode all gaily in the summertime as aforesaid, that he came to a certain part of the road where he beheld before him a tall and comely tower that stood upon a green hillock immediately by the roadside. And lo, there stood upon the balcony of that tower 3 fair damsels, clad all in green taffeta. And at the high road in front of the castle there was a knight clad in very fine armor. And the knight sat upon a noble war horse, and in his hands he held a lute, and he played upon the lute and sang in a voice of extraordinary sweetness. Whiles he sang, those 3 ladies in green taffeta listened to him with great cheerfulness of mien. And whenever that knight would stint his singing, then those 3 ladies would clap their hands together with great acclaim, and would bid him to sing to them again. And so he would do with great readiness of spirit. All this King Arthur beheld, and appeared to him a very pleasant sight, wherefore he rejoiced at it exceedingly. And as he drew nigh, lo, he beheld that the knight who sat upon his horse and played upon the lute, and sang upon the accompaniment thereof, was none other than Sir Geraint, the son of Erbin. For that knight wore upon his crest the figure of a griffin, and the device upon his shield was of 2 griffins rampant facing one another, upon a field of azure. And King Arthur knew that this was the crest of the device of Sir Geraint. And when the king perceived that it was this knight who sat there and sang, he laughed unto himself, and straightway closed his visor, and made him ready for such encounter as might perchance befall. So he drew nigh to where the knight sang, and the ladies listened. Now when Sir Geraint perceived King Arthur approach, he ceased singing, and hung up his lute behind him across his shoulder. Then casting upwards his look to those 3 fair ladies above him, quoth he, Mesdames, ye have been pleased to listen to that singing which I have essayed altogether in your honour. Now likewise, in your honour, I'll perform a deed of knightly prowess which I am very much hope will bring great glory to you. For if ye will be pleased to lend me that encouragement which your very great beauty can so easily afford, ye shall behold me, I doubt not, to overthrow yonder knight completely, and that to your great credit and renown. So knight, said the lady who spoke for the others, you are truly a lord of noble bearing and exceedingly pleasing of address. Wherefore we do wish you great success in this undertaking, and we do believe that you will succeed in which you essay to do. Upon these, Sir Geraint gave those 3 damsels great thanks for their words, and thereupon he closed the visor of his helmet. So addressing his spear and shield, and saluting those 3 ladies with great humility and demeanour, he went forth to meet King Arthur, where he now sat a little distance, very quietly and soberly awaiting his pleasure. Now Sir Geraint knew not who King Arthur was, because he wore no crest upon his helm, and no device upon his shield. Wherefore, as he saluted him, he made speech to him in this wise. Ha! Messire! I know not who thou art, seeing as thou bearest neither crest nor device. Nevertheless, I am minded to do thee such a honour as I may be running a tilt with thee upon the behalf of those 3 damsels, whom thou beholdest yonder upon that balcony. For I do affirm that I am ready to maintain the same with my knightly person, as those ladies are fairer than thy lady, whomsoever she may be. Sir Knight, quoth King Arthur, I will gladly run a course with thee in honour of my lady, for, I may tell thee, she is a princess, and is held by many to be the most beautiful dame in all the world. But I will only contend with thee upon one condition, and the condition is this, that he who is overthrown shall yield himself as servant unto the other for 7 days, and in that time he shall do all that may be required of him. I will accept thy gage, Sir Unknown Knight, quoth Sir Geraint, and when I have overthrown thee, I will lead thee upon those fair ladies yonder for to be their servant for 7 days. And I do tell thee that there are a great many knights who would certainly regard that as being both a pleasant and honourable task. And should I so chance as to overthrow thee, said King Arthur, I will send thee for to serve in lady for that same period of time, and that will be an even pleasanter and more honourable task than that which thou hast a mind for me to perform. So each knight saluted the other, and thereupon each took a stand as should cast the encounter immediately beneath those 3 fair damsels looked down from the balcony. Then each knight dressed his spear and his shield, and having made ready for the encounter, each sat at a small space entirely prepared. Then each shouted to his war horse, and drave spur into its flank, and launched forth with powerful speed into the assault. So they met in the very midst of the course, with a force so vehement that the noise thereof was wonderfully appalling for to hear. And each knight smote the other in the very centre of his defences. And lo, the spear of Sir Geraint burst into small pieces, even to the truncheon thereof, but the spear of King Arthur held, and Sir Geraint was cast so vehemently backward that both he and his horse were overthrown into the dust with a tumult like to a monstrous roaring of thunder. And when Sir Geraint had recovered his footing, he was for a while so astonished that he wist not where he stood, for never had he been so overthrown in all his life before. Then coming quickly unto himself again, he straightway drew forth his sword and called upon King Arthur with exceeding vehemence for to come down out of his saddle and to fight him afoot. Nay, not so, Sir Knight, said King Arthur. I will not have to do with thee in that way. Moreover, thou art not to forget that thou hast promised to give thyself unto my servant for 7 days, for assuredly I have entirely overcome thee in this encounter, and now thou art pledged unto me to be my servant. Then Sir Geraint knew not what to say, being altogether abashed with shame and vexation at his overthrow. Nevertheless, he perceived that he must uphold his knightly word unto that which he had pledged himself to do. Wherefore he put up his sword again, though with exceeding discontent. Sir Knight, said he, I do acknowledge myself to have been overcome in this encounter. Wherefore I yield myself now unto thy commands, according to my blighted word. Then I do place my commands upon thee in this wise, quoth King Arthur. My command is, that thou goest straightway unto the Lady Guinevere at Cameliard, and that thou tellest her that thou hast been overthrown by that knight, whom she gave her necklace as a token. Moreover, I do desire that thou shalt obey her in everything that she may command thee to do, and for that the space of 7 days to come. Sir Knight, quoth Sir Geraint, that which thou biddest me to do I'll perform according to thy commands. Thereupon he mounted his horse and went his way, and King Arthur went his way. And those 3 ladies who stood upon the balcony of the castle were exceedingly glad that they had beheld so noble an essay at arms as that which they had looked down on. Now, after King Arthur had travelled forward to the distance of 2 or 3 leagues or more, he came to a certain place of moorlands, where were many ditches of water, and where the heron and the marsh hen sought harbourage in the sedge. And here, at sundry points, were several windmills with their sails all turning slowly in the sunlight before a breeze which blew across the level plains of ooze. And in this place there was a long straight causeway with 2 long rows of pollard willows. Now, when he had come nigh to the middle of this causeway, King Arthur perceived 2 knights who sat on their horses in the shade of a great windmill that stood upon one side of the roadway. And a large shadow of the sails moved ever and anon across the roadway as the wheel of the mill turned slowly afore the wind. And all about the mill and everywhere about were great quantities of swallows that darted hither and thither like bees about a hive in midsummer. And King Arthur saw that those 2 knights, as they sat in the shadow of the mill, were eating a great loaf of rye bread, fresh baked of brittle crust, and they ate fair white cheese, which things the miller, all white with dust, served to them. But when these 2 knights perceived King Arthur, they immediately ceased eating that bread and cheese, and straightway closed their helmets. As for the miller, when he saw them thus prepare themselves, he went quickly back into the mill and shut the door thereof, and then went and looked out of the window which was above where the knights were standing. But King Arthur made very merry unto himself when he perceived that those 2 knights were Sir Gawain and Sir Ywain, for he knew that one was Sir Gawain because of the crest of his helmet was a leopard rampant, and because he bore upon his shield the device of a leopard rampant upon a field of gules. And he knew that the other was Sir Ywain because he bore upon his crest a unicorn, and because the device upon his shield was that of a lady holding a naked sword in her hand. Accordingly, whilst he was yet at some distance, King Arthur closed his helmets that those 2 young knights might not know who he was. So when he had come near to the 2 knights, Sir Gawain rode forward a little distance for to meet him. Sir Knight, quoth he, thou must know that this is a soothly perilous ground whereupon thou hast ventured, for there is no way to bypass hence across the morass, and thou mayest not go forward without trying a tilt with me. Sir Knight, said King Arthur, and I am very willing to run a tilt with thee. Nevertheless, I will only encounter thee upon one condition, and that is this, that he who is overthrown shall serve the other entirely for the space of a full 7 days. I do accept thy gage, Sir Knight, quoth Sir Gawain, for he said unto himself, of a surety so exceedingly strong and skillful a knight as I should easily encompass the overthrow of this unknown knight. So each knight immediately took his appointed station, and having dressed his spear and his shield, and having fully prepared himself in every manner, and having rested for a little space, each suddenly shouted to his horse, and drave spur into the flanks thereof, and so rushed into the encounter. And when each knight smote the other in the midst of his defence, and lo, the spear of Sir Gawain burst into fragments, but the spear of King Arthur held, so that Sir Gawain was lifted entirely out of his saddle, and over the crupper of his horse. And indeed he fell with wonderful violence into the dust, nor could he immediately arise from that fall, but lay all bedazed for a little while. And when he did arise, he perceived that the white knight who had overthrown him sat nigh to him upon his horse. Then King Arthur spake and said, Sir Knight, I have altogether overthrown thee, and so thou must serve me accordingly to thy knightly word. Then up spake Sir Ewain, who sat nearby upon his horse. "Not so, Sir Knight," he said. "Not so, nor until thou hast had to do with me. For I do make demand of thee, that thou shalt straightway joust with me. And if I overthrow thee, I will claim of thee that thou shalt release my cousin from that servitude upon which he hath pledged himself. But if thou overthrowest me, then will I serve thee even as he pledgeth himself to serve thee." "Sir Knight," said King Arthur, "I do accept thy gage with all readiness of spirit." And so each knight took his assigned place and dressed himself for the encounter. Then they shouted and drave together, rushing the one upon the other like unto two rams upon the hillside. And the spear of Sir Ewain was also shivered into pieces, but King Arthur's spear held, so that the girths of Sir Ewain's saddle were burst apart, and both the saddle and the knight were swept off the horse's back with such violence that a tower falling could not have made a greater noise than did Sir Ewain when he smote the dust of that causeway. Then Sir Ewain rose to his feet, and gazed upon him, all filled with entire amazement. To him came King Arthur, and bespake him thus: "Ha, Sir Knight, meseems that thou hast been fairly overcome this day. And so, according to your promises, both thou and yonder other knight must fulfill all my commands upon the space of a full 7 days to come. Now this is the command that I set upon ye both, that ye shall straightway go unto Lady Guinevere at Camelard, and shall take her greeting from her knight. And ye shall say to her that her knight unto whom she gave her necklace hath sent ye, who are the king's sons, for to do obedience upon her. And all that she shall command ye to do in the space of these 7 days that are to come, that ye shall perform even unto the smallest grain." "Sir Knight," said Sir Gawain, "so will we do according to thy commands, having pledged ourselves thereunto. But when these 7 days are past, I do make my vow that I shall seek ye out, and shall carry this combat unto its entire extremity. For it may happen to any knight to be unhorsed as I have been, yet I do believe that I may have better success with thee, and battle with thee to the extremity of my endeavor." So when Sir Ewain had mended the girths of his saddle, then he and Sir Gawain mounted their horses and betook their way toward Camelard, much cast down in spirits. Then the miller came forth from the mill once more, greatly rejoicing at having beheld such a wonderfully knightly encounter from so safe a place as that which he had beheld it. And so King Arthur rode onward with great content of mind until the slanting of the afternoon had come. And by that time he had come nigh to that arm of the forest land which he had in mind as the proper place where he might leave his horse and his armor. Now as he drew nigh to this part of the forest skirts, he perceived before him at the roadside a gnarled and stunted oak tree. And he perceived upon that oak tree there hung a shield, and that underneath the shield were written these words in fair large letters: "Whoso smiteth upon this shield doeth so at the peril of his body." Then King Arthur was filled with a great spirit, and uplifting his spear, he smote upon that shield so that it rang like thunder. Then immediately King Arthur heard a voice issue out from the forest, crying, "Who hath dared to assail my shield?" And straightway there came thence a knight of large frame, riding upon a horse white, like that which King Arthur himself rode, and the trappings of the horse and the knight were all white like unto the trappings of King Arthur and his horse. And the knight bore upon his helmet as his crest a swan with outspread wings, and upon his shield he bore the emblazonment of 3 swans upon a field argent. And because of the crest and the emblazonment of the shield, King Arthur knew that this knight was Sir Pellias, who had come with him from Camelot to Tintagel. So when Sir Pellias had come nigh to where King Arthur waited for him, he drew rein and bespake him with great sternness of voice. "Ho, ho, Sir Knight," quoth he, "why didst thou dare to smite upon my shield? Verily that blow shall bring thee great peril and dole. Now prepare to defend thyself straightway because of what thou hast done." "Stay, stay, Sir Knight," said King Arthur. "It shall be as thou wouldst have it, and I will do combat with thee. Yet will I not assay this adventure until thou hast agreed that the knight who is to overcome the other in this encounter shall serve the other in whatsoever manner that the other may desire, for the space of 7 nights from this time." "Sir Knight," said Sir Pellias, "I do accept that risk, wherefore I bid thee now presently to prepare thyself for the encounter." Thereupon each knight took his station, and dressed his spear and shield. And when they had prepared themselves, they immediately launched together with a violence so as 2 stones cast from a catapult, so that they met in the midst of the course. And again King Arthur was entirely successful in that assault which he made, for the spear of Sir Pellias burst into pieces, and the spear of King Arthur held, and Sir Pellias was cast with passing violence out of the saddle for the distance of more than half a spear's length behind the crupper of his horse. Nor did he altogether recover from that fall for a long time, so that King Arthur had to wait beside him for a considerable while ere he was able to lift himself from the ground whereupon he lay. "Ha, Sir Knight," said King Arthur, "assuredly it hath not gone well for thee this day, for thou hast been entirely overthrown, and now thou must straightway redeem thy pledge to serve me for 7 days hereafter. Wherefore I now set it upon thee as my command, that thou shalt go straightway unto Camelard, and that thou shalt greet the Lady Guinevere from me, telling her that her knight unto whom she has given her necklace hath been successful in battle with thee. Likewise, I set it upon thee that thou shalt obey her for the space of 7 days in whatsoever she may command thee to do. Sir Knight, said Sir Pellias, it shall be even as thou dost ordain. Yet, I would that I knew who thou art, for I do declare that I have never yet in all my life have been overthrown as thou hast overthrown me. And indeed, I think that there are very few men in the world who would serve me as thou hast served me. Sir Knight, said King Arthur, some time thou shalt know who I am, but as yet I am bound to entire secrecy. Thereupon he saluted Sir Pellias, and turned and entered the forest, and was gone. And Sir Pellias mounted his horse, and betook him to Camelard, much cast down and disturbed in spirit, yet much marvelling at that knight who would have so served him as he had been served. So that day there came to Camelard Sir Geraint, and then Sir Gawain, and Sir Ewain, and last of all there came Sir Pellias. And when these four beheld one another, they were all abashed, so that one scarce dared to look the other in the face. And when they came before Lady Guinevere, and made their condition known to her, and told her how that knight who had wore her necklace had overthrown them, and all that had sent them thither to serve her as her knight, and when she reckoned how great and famous these four knights in deeds of chivalry, she exceedingly exalted that her knight should have approved himself so great in these deeds of arms, which she had undertaken to perform. But she greatly marveled who that champion could be, and debated those things in her own mind, for it was a thing altogether unheard of that one knight in one day, and with a single spear, should have overthrown 5 such well-proved and famous knights as Duke Mordaunt of Northumber, Sir Geraint, Sir Gawain, Sir Ewain, and Sir Pellias. So she gave herself great joy that she had bestowed the gift of her necklace upon so worthy a knight, and she had exceedingly uplifted with extraordinary pleasure that the thought of the credit she had endowed her withal. Now after King Arthur had entered the forest, he came by and by to where those wood choppers afore spoken of plied their craft, and he abided with them for that night. And when the next morning had come, he entrusted them with his horse and armor, charging them to guard those things with all care, and that they should be wonderfully rewarded therefor. Then he took his departure from that place with intent to return unto Camelard, and he was clad in that jerkin of frieze which had worn ever since he had left into Gallen. And when he had reached the outskirts of the forest, he set his cap of disguise upon his head, and so resumed his mean appearance once more. So, his knightliness being entirely hidden, he returned to Camelard for to be a gardener's boy as he had been before.